We're chatting with the National Party leader, David Littleproud, just towards the end of the year when an energy summit's about to happen. David, good morning to you, but also it sounds like Peter Malinauskas, the South Australian Premier, has been walked back by Prime Minister Albanese.
Well, he should stand up to Anthony Albanese. He's done the right thing. There should be a mature conversation about our energy mix moving into the future. We should look at the emerging technology that's coming, particularly in nuclear. I'm not a believer in big nuclear power plants, but there's these things called small-scale modular nuclear that are emerging, particularly in Northern America, that are safer. And what we should do is just peek over the Pacific, don't have to spend a cent, and just understand that if we can adopt and adapt safely here in Australia, then we should be prepared to have that conversation to add to the mix. Because renewables can't do it all. Despite what Chris Bowen says, you need this thing called firming. And that's not me saying, that's the Australian Energy Market Operator who runs our market. Renewables can only do so much, and so you'll need firming either through gas and coal. Coal will be difficult because you've got to keep the power station all the time, and you should be looking at this new emerging technology to go into the mix. The bigger the spread, the safer we are. And if you can get the price of it down, which they believe they can in the United States, then why wouldn't we look at it? And when Generation 4 of this technology even reprocesses the waste, I think the South Australian Premier has shown some courage. The AWU said the same thing, Dan Walton. He believes we should explore it. So there's Labor luminaries running around agreeing with the Nationals. Now, we didn't go down that path when we were in government because the Liberals weren't ready to take it up. The Nationals have been consistent on this, is that we should look at that technology. And I think Australians should be given the opportunity to make that decision. We should trust the Australian people to do that. And I called for an energy summit when I first became Nationals leader. And I think this is where we should start that education piece where Australians can make an informed decision. So I'm asking the PM to reconsider knocking that back and to have that conversation with the Australian people so they can make an informed decision, not politicians in Canberra.
Yeah, some of the guests we've had here on Flow talking about nuclear energy have said we could be rolling this out within the space of 10 years with all the regulatory and other requirements needed to provide that baseload power. So, with this energy summit happening on Friday, is that part of, this is one that's happening regarding the current prices and the calls for cap gas and coal prices, but isn't this part of the longer-term conversation?
Well, that's exactly right. So all that they're talking about, the summit on Friday, is about the short term. And this goes to the heart of this government just looking at the short term rather than long term, because you're not going to structurally adjust this if you don't adjust supply. This is all a supply issue. We don't have supply. They've got a philosophical bent against gas, and they've taken away exploration development grants to increase supply because they believe renewables can do it all. It is madness. It is reckless. And so this government needs to understand that you have to get the balance right on this, and you should have a conversation about making sure we haven't got all our energy eggs in the one basket, because you'll have to pay. And you're going to pay also with 28,000 kilometres of new transmission lines to do renewables, which is going to cost you a hell of a lot. It might be cheap in generation, but in distribution, they're not going to gold plate the distribution, the transmission lines like Gillard did. They're going to platinum plate it, and you're going to have to pay, and those farmers are going to have to pay with a whole lot of towers across their properties, whereas you can actually simply use nuclear, small-scale modular nuclear, and plug it into existing places where coal-fired power stations are and may close down. That's just common sense. And that's all the Nationals want to do, is have a conversation about some common sense in Canberra, and we just say to the PM, don't look at the short term. We've got to look at long-term sustainable options to give reliable, cheap, affordable energy that reduces our emissions. And that's all we're saying.
And David Littleproud, you mentioned farmers. We'll get back to them in a moment. But I do wonder, with the industrial relations debate, a lot of commentary that was made about this was sort of paying the piper with the union movement behind them. Is there a suggestion in the energy debate that maybe Labor's a bit too close to the renewable energy advocates and industry and refusing to consider an industry like nuclear as part of the mix?
Yeah, and this is where I think there's an opportunity for them to listen to their political masters, the AWU. Dan Walton and I have danced a few times.
You're no mates with Dan Walton.
Yeah, no, exactly. But Dan Walton's right on this. We're on a unity ticket at long last. I knew we'd find something we could agree on. But the AWU can see this because, you know what, to the heart, and all credit to AWU, well, we don't agree on a lot, but they are trying to preserve jobs in Australia. And if you don't have a reliable and cheap energy source, then you won't have manufacturing. They won't have members. So it's time that the Labor Party do listen to the AWU within and the South Australian Premier, and forget about the fact that there's a lot of money going to be made by these renewable companies. And I get it, that I'm not against renewables. In fact, I've got renewables in my own electorate. They'll play a role. But we shouldn't put all our energy eggs in one basket, which is what Chris Bowen's doing. And that means unreliable energy. And it means that you're going to have power lines running through your property that you didn't need to have. So we're just asking for some common sense, for some calm and some constructive conversation. And that's what the Nationals are trying to achieve. And that's what we'll continue to do.
Some agreement with the Australian Workers' Union starts to sound a bit like Christmas is coming. Bit of conciliatory talk there, but I'll tell you what, you did have your blues with them over the year regarding the agricultural visa, and some farmers are going to face a pretty challenging Christmas where they're going to be harvesting normally when they wouldn't be because of the late conditions.
Yeah, and in fact, everyone's going to pay for this. It's going to be a challenging Christmas because your grocery bill's going up, because farmers had to make investment decisions not to plan as much because they didn't have the surety of labour to pick it. You don't plant a crop unless you know you can pick it. You wouldn't spend the money on it. So that means that supply's gone down and price goes up, and that means you pay at the checkout. And that's because of the decision of this government to get rid of the ag visa and to limit it to the Pacific scheme, which is about 130,000 workers short of the 172,000 workers that the NFF identified that was needed to get food from a paddock to your plate. So everyone's paying the price for this, but farmers who have struggled from seasonal conditions have now got a man-made disaster on their doorstep because the government's taken away their labour supply. And Dan Moulton was at the heart of that because he went to embassies and ambassadors and said, do not send your workers under the ag visa to Australia because they will be exploited. Now, what Australian organisation does that to a fellow Australian? You get in and you fix and you weed out those that do the wrong thing. And there are organisations like the Fair Work Ombudsman that was doing that. But this was just an ideological view that means not only farmers will pay, but you'll pay this Christmas at a checkout. And you should see Anthony Albanese's face on that docket every time you're at the supermarket.
And I do notice there was at least some glimmer of hope that the Vietnam arrangements were going to continue that your government was negotiating when you were in government. So there's at least some positivity for farmers who are incredibly resilient when you consider the effort they've had to do, and they're still, according to ABARES, sitting on top of a potentially almost record crops and a strong progress towards that $100 billion in farm gate value by 2030.
Yeah, and this is despite all that's been thrown at our farmers, they continue to produce significant amounts. Primarily, this is in broadacre, not in horticulture, these results, which are astounding considering the floods we've gone through in New South Wales. But a bumper year that Australian farmers have continued to produce, but they need the tools. They need the tools to be able to continue to get to that $100 billion. And when they continue to increase production, we all win because supply goes up, our prices go down, and farmers are able to export more. That pays the bills for our doctors, our nurses, our hospitals, our schools. And this is why governments just need to give our farmers the tools and then get the hell out of their lives. That's what a good government should do. They shouldn't restrict them. They should give them the tools, put the regulatory guide rails there so they don't do anything silly, and then just get out of their lives and let them do what they do best, which is produce the best food and fibre in the world and continue to improve it despite not only natural disasters but man-made disasters put in place by this government.
Speaking of putting tools in people's hands, we've been hearing about the expert marksmen in the northeast of South Australia knocking over 500 or 600 pigs in the space of about 53 hours. The Arid Lands Landscape Board there were praising the work of the former federal government for putting those tools in their hands. Just give us a bit of a background about why feral animal control was a focus of your government.
Yeah, look, this was not just about productivity. This was about stopping spread of disease, particularly with pigs. We've got African swine fever on our doorstep, and it's about eradication. And, you know, while this is state government's responsibility, the federal government just got jacker waiting. We had all these plans and all these talk, but we didn't see a lot of lead shot out of guns with dead carcasses. Is what is the only way to fix this problem. And we needed to give them the tools. We spent over $40-odd million in a plan that identified where they were so that we knew where the hotspots were. And then we can get those people with the right skills to do it in a humane way to start levelling these pigs. And we need that right across the country in a coordinated approach to make sure we reduce the numbers that reduces the risk of exotic pests and diseases that these can spread. And that's just common sense. And I was sick of the talk, and I expected to see lead come out of barrels rather than just more planning. The planning is done, and now we just need lead coming out, and we need to reduce the numbers that way in a humane way that will not just protect Australian agriculture, it will protect the environment. That's common sense, and that's what the Nationals make sure that when we spend your money, you get a common sense approach out of it. But you need the commitment of the community, and I've got to say, these communities that have stood up and started to level these pigs, good on you. You're the heroes of this. The easiest thing I did was just make sure I gave you the dollars to fire the lead.
Well, just on target before we finish the Victorian state election, first chance we've had a chat with you about that. Jade Benham in the seat of Mildura, one of 3 winners of seats off of independence for the Nationals. You'd be pretty happy about that.
Oh, stoked. And Jade's a cracker. She's going to do a great job for the people of Mildura, and just invested in the community. And this is about making sure that we get the right candidates. We had a great candidate in Shepparton as well, and then Morwell, and we've able to transition Euroa as well. But the Nationals is just about making sure you get the right candidate and just talk common sense. And that's about taking common sense to Spring Street. And Jade will do that because she's connected to the community. She knows what the pressures are, and she'll fight for it. And sometimes you get knocked around the chops a bit because you stand up for your principles. And I think people respect the fact, well, they mightn't always agree with you. So long as you're prepared to stand up, you understand your local community, they'll back you. And the Nationals, that's the core principles I want to get back to in leading a party, not just at a national level, but at state level, working with our state guys just to bring common sense to politics. That's the Nationals way. And we're very proud of the result. A lot of hard work, but now it's about maintaining that trust and making sure that those voices are heard in Spring Street, and Jade will be a champion of doing that.
Well, David Littleproud, National Party Leader, thanks again for joining us, not just today, but throughout 2022. Look forward to more chats in 2023. Have a cracker Christmas. We'll talk to you next year.
You too, mate. Have a safe one, and thanks for all the work you do in bringing the community together, and have a great one.